it isn't easy if you want to make change, but what the hell else are we here to do?
This is the Regenerative Real Estate Podcast. Revitalizing the world together. Welcome to the Regenerative Real Estate Podcast. I am your host, Neil Collins, and thank you for tuning in today because you're in for a real treat. Our guest today is Jason McLennan from McLennan Design. And I got to come clean here. Whenever I saw this block on my calendar with Jason's name on it, getting closer and closer to recording day, I just got more and more nervous as time went on. And if you know of Jason, then you know why. Because Jason McLennan is considered one of the world's most influential individuals in the field of architecture and the green building movement today. He is a highly sought out designer and consultant and thought leader from around the planet. He is a recipient of so many different prestigious awards like the Buckminster Fuller Prize, which is probably the planet's top prize for socially responsible design. He gets called things like the Steve Jobs of the green building industry and a world changer by magazines like Green Biz, and has been selected as the Award of Excellence winner for Engineering News Record, one of the only individuals in the architecture profession to have won the award in its 52-year history. Jason McLennan, how we first learned of him as a professional troublemaker, was the creator of the Living Building Challenge, arguably the world's most stringent and progressive green building program in existence. He is the author of 6 books on sustainability and design used by thousands of practitioners each year, including the philosophy of sustainable design. And that's really considered the Bible for green building. Jason is both an Ashoka Fellow and a Senior Fellow of the Design Futures Council. He has been selected by Yes Magazine as one of 15 people shaping the world, and he's working closely with world leaders, Fortune 500 companies, leading NGOs, major universities, celebrities, and influential development companies. And so you can see that Jason is just one of those people that has done so much in his career. And you just, whenever you talk with him, you're kind of in awe, and you're like, wait a second, where do I want to go with this interview and with these questions? Because we have so much to talk about. And I had to respect Jason's time. There's a lot going on right now. There's, during the recording, forest fires and insane political situations that just really underscore the importance of why we need to be having these conversations and why we need to be changing the built environment. So without further ado, I would love to introduce Jason McLennan on the Regenerative Real Estate Podcast. Enjoy. I'm really pleased to have Jason McLennan on the podcast this week. Jason is a figurehead in the regenerative design movement. Jason, thanks so much for taking the time.
Oh, my pleasure to be here.
Jason, this comes at a really crazy time because we are both going through forest fires on the West Coast. It is completely smoky where we are, and it just seems like this is such a important time for the conversation that you've been spearheading for a long time. But I'd love to give the listeners, if they're not familiar with you or your work, just a bit about your background.
Yeah, no, my pleasure. Well, it depends on what you want to know. I grew up in Canada. So I'm Canadian. I've lived here though for a very long time, and my family are dual citizens of both the US and Canada. And I'm an architect and a planner, troublemaker professionally. Yeah, there's lots we can go into. Let me know what you want to unpack.
Yeah, so if you grew up in Canada, where did life take you? Did you know that you're going to be doing architecture from a young age?
Yeah, no, absolutely. I'm knew when I was probably definitely by middle school that I wanted to be an architect. for a variety of reasons, and had kind of a laser focus on moving in that direction. And it was also, an environmentalist at a young age as well. And so this whole passion for me has just been all that I've, wanted to do and knew that I had to do. And it's taken me to some pretty interesting places. I studied in the United States and a little bit in Europe, and traveled in a lot of different countries, really in a pursuit to really understand how we can design and build differently.
And wait, what was it in your travels? The interesting thing for me is we've had a lot of podcast guests come on, and it seems the theme throughout is that they were exposed to nature from an early age, and that a lot of people did traveling. What was it during that time that might have altered your course?
Yeah, well, I mean, it's quite a few things. Yes, I spent a lot of time in nature. It's a very Canadian thing to do. I spent a lot of time canoeing and camping, hiking, and being surrounded by the natural world. I've talked about this, a fair number of times. So some of your listeners might be familiar with it. But I grew up in a mining town, um, called Sudbury. The community was really infamous for its environmental degradation. It looked like the moon. It was one of the most polluted places anywhere, and had the world's tallest smokestack, spewing out all sorts of things while we extracted nickel and other ore from beneath the surface. And that had a huge impact on my way of viewing the world. And I really became an environmentalist at a young age, when Sudbury decided to change its landscape back to a greener path, and began one of the world's largest urban reforestation campaigns that eventually won a United Nations commendation. And literally the community, from the time I was growing up as a young kid, we all planted trees, and we literally terraformed this moonscape back to life. And so for me, regeneration is not an idea. It's something that I grew up with, that we can either be agents of degradation or agents of regeneration, depending on how we decide to think and what we decide to value. For me, it was very real. And I grew up watching the landscape heal itself, and trees grow on barren, lifeless rock, and it's completely a different place than when I was young.
It's an incredible story to see that actually come live and take root. Where did you go from there? How did you end up going from architecture school? Were you always thinking about regeneration from the beginning of architecture school?
I didn't necessarily use that word. It was not something that was talked about in that particular way, but environmentalism and being a steward of the planet was something that I had in me because of all this, this work. So I was literally trying to figure out where to go to learn the most about how to design differently, because our cities and our buildings, do incredible amounts of damage to the natural world, and yet we need them to house us. And so, how can we do things differently was really the early journey I was on.
Were you thinking more in terms of, for your career, residences or commercial, or going at the urban planning level?
All of it. All of it. Yeah. Doesn't matter to me, just that we do it.
And so where from there? What you got out of architecture school, and did you end up at another firm, and were you designing things that you thought that you wanted to be designing?
Yeah, I followed, I always like to say that, I followed my bliss. I traveled, I went to school in different places in order to learn things that the industry didn't yet think was cool. That meant that I was one of a smaller group of students that really focused on this. And then I was pretty lucky after I graduated, that I got recruited by B&IM Architects in Kansas City, which was founded by Bob Berkebile, who is one of the pioneers of green building in the United States. He founded the AIA Committee on the Environment, for example. And Bob found me in Oregon at the time, recruited me out, and we collaborated together for many, many years on all sorts of things that really started my career out in the right way.
And what does that look like? What starting your career out in the right way? What discipline were you working in?
Well,
Were there any projects that really stand out?
yeah, well, I never compromised. I've only done green building my entire career. I was not about to work on something that I didn't believe in. And working with Bob was a perfect fit because he felt the same, and he had gone through an incredible journey in his life, and was doing a lot of the early green demonstration projects before there was LEED, and again before the wind was in our sails, when it wasn't cool to be green. And so we started to do together some of these amazing projects that were pioneers for the industry, and then we're there working to help get the U.S. Green Building Council off the ground, and get LEED into the market and so forth in those early years.
What do you think it was that actually put the wind in the green building sales? Was there a time that you really remember that stands out, or has it just gradually built over time?
Well, there has been a gradual growth in interest. I definitely do think the U.S. Green Building Council and LEED was a big shot in the arm for the industry, because it really gave some definition to what we meant by green building, where before it was open to a lot more interpretation. And so that was a big thing. And definitely the time had come. It was becoming harder and harder to ignore the fact that we were designing buildings as a society that were energy hogs and bad on people's health, and climate was beginning to be a real thing, even way back then, and so forth. And so there's it's really a host of factors that contributed to this.
You are famously known as being the figurehead of the International Living Future Institute. At what point did that started to percolate in your mind?
Yeah, no, that's true. That I spent, after I left B&IM, I spent the next decade building and getting the Living Building Challenge and a whole host of things off the ground through first Cascadia and then the Living Future Institute that I founded. But the seeds of this really go back quite far. Bob and I were talking about living buildings before LEED existed, for example. We both of us were really enamored by the idea that now people talk about all the time, that we needed to design buildings that were emulating natural systems, the buildings like trees, buildings like flowers, and would talk about these ideas to anyone who would listen back in the 1990s. But it was a little bit ahead of its time at that time. And can't say that it was taken very seriously. But I wrote several articles in the late 90s about living buildings, and we talked to many clients about it. And at the very end of that decade, we were hired by the David and Lucille Packard Foundation to do their headquarters. And we, on that project, and now LEED was out in the market. We actually did a big study, groundbreaking study called the Packard Matrix, which looked at the costs of green building going from LEED certified all the way up to this idea of living buildings before there was a sort of a protocol. And so it was something we were actually analyzing. In that case, I was like 2001, 2002. So it's been, the idea has been around for some time, and it wasn't until 2005 that I really was convinced that the time was right to really try to get this more seriously into the marketplace as a philosophy.
And was that first building the Bullitt Center, or was it for the Packard Foundation, or is that one and the same?
No, very, very different projects and very different timeline. The Bullitt Center was built in 2015, and I launched the Living Building Challenge in 2006 to the world. The ideas, came about in the 1990s, but the certification program, that all the armature around it, it didn't happen until after 2006. But the first living buildings, there were three that sort of tied, to be the first, and then there was a whole bunch of other projects that quickly emerged. So the Bullitt Center was far from the first, but it was very unique in terms of its scale and the fact that it was a commercial office building that was semi-speculative even in nature. So
It's certainly an amazing example, and we've had Al Tozer on the show.
yeah.
The first one, the first residential one, Amanda Sturgeon has been on, and just some really interesting insights. And one of the reasons why I really wanted to talk with you, Jason, is like what you put out a living building challenge into a time when a lot of people, even to this day, it's hard for people to grasp that we're living in a very degenerative manner, especially in our urban environments. Well, urban and rural, both, right? But especially in the urban, where we are quite disconnected from natural systems. What has it been like to look back over the last really 20 years from whenever you said, let's put the Living Building Challenge out there, to see where it's at now?
Well, it's making me feel old as you talk about it. But yeah, no, well, it was an idea that needed to be out in the world. We had this invisible glass ceiling of what we thought we could do with green buildings, which was really this sort of LEED Platinum level, and it really wasn't focusing on the real destination, which was, of course, to get back to this type of impact that nature has when it builds things. And that's really what we have to do if we want to keep being successful as a species on this planet. And really, the Living Building Challenge is really asking a series of tough questions around the nature of our impact, and what it means to build habitat on this planet. You're right. People thought I was crazy when I launched the program. It was illegal everywhere. It was expensive and it was difficult. And there wasn't, transparency around materials. And there was a whole host of barriers, but that was really just the things that I knew I needed to tackle. And so I literally created a wall of cards in my garage that had all the things that I wanted to take on in the industry. And when I felt like I had made a dent, I removed the card from the wall. And it took 10 years to get down to where I felt like that all the cards were now in play, at least, even though, we have a long way to go with all these issues, but we're now on a path. We're on a path to reformulating all of our products to be free of redless chemicals. We've removed a lot of the archaic laws against water reuse and capture. We've built a transparency movement in the materials economy. Our work with Declare, people thought we would never be successful with that, and we are being very successful. We've introduced issues of equity and social justice and beauty and good design into the whole program. And there really is a movement now, which is a lot bigger than me, and involves a lot of people that I've never even met or may not ever meet, which is cool, doing this work. So.
Yeah, I would imagine some of those cards are still hanging in your garage.
Well, they're all still issues to work on, but the beautiful thing is, I feel like with a lot of them, I did what I could do to change the discussion and put ideas out into the world. And really, then it takes others to to move ideas along. It takes a whole community, a movement to make lasting, definitive change. But I view my role as being a bit of a catalyst, or somebody lighting a spark to get others to move forward together.
And that's where I have a lot of questions. Or mainly just one question is that you were starting the Living Building Challenge. You're an architect. How were you getting the leverage in your life? Like, how do you start the Living Building Challenge, the Living Future Institute, continue to design? Like, that just seems like you're wearing so many different hats with so many different balls in the air that it'd be very hard to manage.
Yeah, well, no, I mean, life, it isn't easy if you want to make change, but what the hell else are we here to do? It's one of those things where you have to be, if you want to create change, you have to be willing to take on a lot of personal risk, and you have to be willing to fail, and you have to, be willing to make mistakes and learn from them, but that's how you grow, and that's how you do make an impact. And you know, it was it still is it's a tough line to be in the change business, but it's worthwhile when you see the change happening around you. It's just what you have to do.
When did you step back from being the CEO of the Living Future Institute?
Yeah, 2015 is really when I transitioned out of being um, a member of the staff at that point, so to speak, and um, then I served as the chairman of the board for several years, and now I'm just a regular board member at the institute, and enjoying that process very much. And when I made that transition, I opened my practice back up, and started designing living buildings, and net zero energy projects and that kind of thing. So I'm just changing my tactics, but I'm still doing the same work.
Has that been a nice shift for you to go back into private practice? Are you still quite focused on advancing the institute through being a board member, or do you find
Yeah.
your time is more consumed with designing?
Well, yeah, no, I like being a board member. I don't feel like I have to run the day to day of the organization anymore. I was never my goal to run a nonprofit. The nonprofit is the vehicle in which to make change through. And so, it's great to be able to just influence and provide ideas to the nonprofit while I build other tools and other ways to help change the marketplace.
I was on a call the other day with some of the institute staff, and they were talking about how do we create a financial pitch deck for developers. That the question they get a lot is, how much is it going to cost to build a living building? And they were just kind of pinging us for our ideas coming from the development world. And that's really what I'm curious is, if you're getting sought out, and I would imagine you're getting sought out to design living buildings, how much of that conventional development world is still going on with people coming to you saying, how much is this going to cost to build?
Well, the people that tend to come to me are people that are already convinced they need to do this. But cost is always an issue in every project. And what we're getting better at as an industry, but certainly my firm as a subset of that, is we are figuring out how to do this within very, very reasonable budgets. And, it's really not the issue that it used to be. And that's where the uptake is coming from. This is not a crazy expensive thing to do. It's a different way of doing things. It's a different way of approaching design and development. But the outcomes can be very, very positive economically. And we just need more people to understand that.
Where do you think the price point is coming in? Like, what is pressing the cost down? Is it just more designers are fluent in this, or is it the ability to have a list of materials that you can use and it's cutting down on human resources?
Yeah, well, it's really a combination of all those things and other things. The market is changing. A lot of the technologies that we often use are cheaper than they were, considerably cheaper. There's more options for materials because of the work that we've done on materials and transparency. There's more knowledge and know-how from designers and engineers to builders on how to do this. There's more examples. The every living building that's built is a set of lessons for others to learn from, what to do and what not to do, and all those things together start to drive down costs, and it's really been changing.
Where do you see this going, Jason? Like, look forward 20 more years. What's your vision there?
Well, the thing is that we need a lot more living buildings. I mean, we need to be we need to be building in this manner for everything that we build, and we need to be retrofitting our buildings and not always building new. We need to be um, getting the most out of the investments of infrastructure that we've made over many decades in our communities. Ultimately, though, what has to happen is there has to be a complete shift of the mind, um, from everyone, or at least enough of us, in terms of how we do everything, not just our buildings, our products, our food systems, transportation. This is the great. This is going to prove to be, the great moment in human civilization where we either turned left or headed over the cliff. And the good news is that we don't have to invent ways of doing things differently now. They've been invented. We don't need any new technology, and we don't need to figure out how we need to think differently. We understand all these things now. And now the question is, are we going to do it? And are we going to do it at the scale that is required, with the urgency and timeline that's required?
How do you step outside and find that equanimity whenever it is just so apparent on every different level of our society that we're still just not we're not there. Our collective consciousness is not there, and the entire built environment seems to be contra to what you're talking about. It has I I would imagine you've had to come to peace somehow because the rage that burns inside whenever you start peeling back this onion is just it's quite insurmountable, I feel.
Yeah, it's just that these feelings don't necessarily do a lot of good. Um, my belief is that when you're talking about pain or anger, um, or any of these kinds of very, normal reactions to the injustices around us and the stubbornness of the systems to change, that the best thing you can do is sit with it, but you can't let yourself get caught up in it, and dwell in it, and you also don't want to ignore it and pretend it's not there and live in a fantasy. But that there's a certain amount of healthy detachment and awareness that has to happen so that you can be effective and sit with all the news that's around us, especially this year when there's so much that's going on that's really quite hard for people to stomach.
And rightly so. I think that 2020 should be a catalyst in and of itself, that if this isn't a big enough wake up call, because we just continuously keep learning these lessons or having these lessons thrown at us,
Yep.
and they're going to keep coming until we do learn them and integrate them into not only our built environment but into our
This
habit.
might be, yeah, no, I agree. And this might be the best year that's ever happened to us. Going back to Bob Berkebile that I mentioned earlier, I still chuckle when I think about some of the times that Bob and I spent together on the road. And even back in the 1990s, he used to say to me that 2020 was going to be the year of perfect vision. That it was, he predicted that 2020 we were going to have this sort of global, awareness and clarity around all the things that needed to change. It was going to take that long to get to a place where we would start to really understand and see what needs to change. And so I look, I look back on that and laugh, because I think he was very, very right, but maybe not in the exact way he meant. I think that this year is really showing us, and showing by us, I mean a wider audience of people, how much things have to change. I mean, the daylighting of systemic racism and social injustices needed to be like right in people's faces. And, the pandemic, to look at inequities around health and wellness and the distribution of resources, and how fragile our economy is, needed to be right in people's faces, right? And now we have forest fires and increasing, inclement weather systems, and it's you can't breathe, and all of this, I think, is, like you're saying, if we don't wake up now, then what's it going to take to what level of disaster is it going to be enough to have us take off these glasses that haven't, really been showing us the world properly, and where we develop, really a clear, perfect vision around, okay, it's time to make change. And I think for America, we will see in November whether whether this year is enough to make the change we need to see.
I certainly hope so. It makes me think of a philosopher named Margaret Wheatley, who wrote a book called Who We Choose to Be. And
she's a friend of mine. She's wonderful.
I read that book, and you read, hey, we need to realize that we're in the last epoch of our civilization, and it startles you. And I think that
or the beginning of the next version of it, but yeah.
And that's where I think it really, but if you aren't familiar with those concepts of, okay, what does the transitionary bridge look like between one civilization to the next? And that's where I'm squarely in that camp, because we use such rhetoric that I'm not sure if it's hyperbolic, if we're talking about the end of our species. And you read where, more than 60% of our biological diversity has gone extinct. And so I think you extrapolate that into our own species. And so it feels like we're at this precipice of, I don't know what's coming. And I don't think any of us know what's coming, but certainly driving to create change is something quite admirable, even if it's up against quite insurmountable challenges. And I applaud you for doing that, and for continuing that message for quite some time now. And I'm really excited to see some of the projects that you're working on. Is there anything that you're working on that you think keeps you up in the night, just with the anticipation and excitement?
Well, we're very lucky that we have all sorts of cool projects at different scales, and some that I can talk about, and some that I can't yet, until the clients are ready to talk about it. But one project that's been in the news lately, which I actually didn't serve as the designer for, but played an important role in the direction in the end, is the Climate Pledge Arena in Seattle. What will be the world's greenest sports and entertainment venue. And it's basically going to introduce a lot of these ideas to millions of people that come to a venue that will operate without any fossil fuels, that will be 100% powered by renewable energy, that won't generate single-use plastic waste or waste pretty much at all for all those people, that will offset all the carbon of every attendee for every event with carbon offsets. you know, amongst other things that we're doing there that at a scale that hasn't been done before. And for me, it represents is this idea that if we can do these things for buildings that are that big and that typically, you know, problematic in terms of their environmental footprint, then we can do this for our homes and our offices and for everything else, and also make it exciting and bring people from all walks of life, not just the true believers, not just the environmentalists, but you know, the fans of sport teams and the fans of the rock concerts and the various things there, and get them to understand that we all are in this together and making change. And so that's a project that I'm having a lot of fun with, and excited to see what will happen with it. But it's just one project amongst many that we're doing that's exciting.
Well, Jason, that's terrific. I didn't know about that project, and I'm gonna have to link it in our show notes if there's been press releases about it. But that,
Oh yeah, yeah. There's a ton out there now on it. You'll
oh,
find.
good. I'm glad to help share it to others that haven't heard about it. But I do want to just say, like, thank you for the work that you're doing. It is quite aspirational and inspirational at the same time. But we are taking suit and going in that direction, just because it seems like there's no other choice at this time. But what I've noticed with our own business is that once you take your values and you combine it with your business, you find an alignment that I was searching for a long time. And
Yeah.
it's been such a pleasure to get to know the Living Future Institute better and to become more familiar with that work, and to really get exposure into community that I think you had just such a force to bring together such dedicated professionals that it's unbelievable.
Well, thank you. I appreciate that. Well, I think the people were all out there. We just created a framework that allowed us to play together and to begin to galvanize others. And it is a real special community that's involved with the Institute in particular, for sure.
Well, thank you for your time, Jason, and we appreciate it.
Yeah, no, my pleasure.